Have you ever stopped to wonder why monasteries devoted so much of their precious land to gardens? At first glance, they look peaceful, almost ordinary. But behind those stone walls, something remarkable was happening. Long before pharmacies, vitamin supplements, or modern healthcare, monks carefully selected certain plants and gave each one a place in their gardens. They didn't choose them at random. Every herb, flower, and leaf was grown for a reason. Here's what's fascinating. Many of these plants are still sitting in our kitchens and backyards today. The difference is that most of us have forgotten why they were considered so valuable in the first place. Think about that for a moment. What if one of the herbs you walk past every day was once considered so important that monasteries refused to be without it? Or what if some of history's most trusted plants slowly disappeared? Not because they stopped growing, but because people simply stopped paying attention. In this video, we're uncovering 8 monastery garden plants that supported good health. You'll discover familiar herbs with surprising histories, forgotten plants that were once highly prized, and the fascinating traditions that made these gardens some of the most important places in medieval life. Some of these plants may completely change the way you look at an ordinary garden. Let's step inside the monastery and rediscover the forgotten wisdom growing just beyond its walls. The next plant might surprise you more than any we've seen so far. At first glance, valerian doesn't seem very remarkable. Its small clusters of pale flowers look simple enough, but what really catches people's attention is something unexpected. Its smell. Unlike the sweet fragrance of lavender or the fresh scent of peppermint, valerian has a strong, earthy aroma that many people don't enjoy. In fact, if you judge this plant by its scent alone, you might wonder why anyone would choose to grow it. But the monks had a different way of thinking. They cared far more about a plant's usefulness than whether it smelled pleasant. For centuries, valerian became known as one of the monastery's nighttime herbs. It was traditionally enjoyed in the evening and was believed to encourage relaxation before bed. After long days spent working, reading, praying, and caring for the monastery, a peaceful night's rest was something every monk appreciated. Because of this reputation, valerian earned a respected place in monastery gardens despite its unusual smell. It became another reminder that appearances, and even fragrances, don't always tell the whole story. Today, valerian is still grown by many herbal gardeners around the world. While opinions about its scent haven't changed much, its long history has kept it from being forgotten. Its story teaches a simple lesson. Sometimes the most valuable plants aren't the prettiest or the sweetest smelling. Their true worth is discovered only by those willing to look beyond first impressions. If there were an award for the least delicious herb in the monastery garden, horehound would probably win it. It has a noticeably bitter taste that most people wouldn't describe as enjoyable. Yet despite that, monks continued growing it century after century. Why? Because they believed usefulness mattered far more than flavor. For generations, horehound was traditionally used when people experienced seasonal coughs or an irritated throat. It often found its way into herbal teas and simple homemade preparations that families relied on during the colder months. No one reached for horehound because it tasted wonderful. They reached for it because it had earned their trust through years of tradition. The plant itself was also surprisingly hardy. It didn't demand constant attention and could thrive in many different conditions, making it a dependable addition to monastery gardens. Over time, horehound became well known outside monastery walls as well. In fact, one of its most familiar modern forms is horehound candy, which has been enjoyed in many countries for generations. While its flavor remains slightly bitter, many people still remember it as a traditional sweet associated with soothing the throat. Its story reminds us that not everything valuable comes wrapped in sweetness. Sometimes the things that benefit us most aren't the ones we enjoy the most, and the monks understood that lesson very well. The next plant is one that millions of people walk past every single day without giving it a second thought. It's called plantain, and no, we're not talking about the banana-like fruit. This plant grows low to the ground and is often dismissed as nothing more than a common weed. It appears in lawns, along walking paths, and in open fields across much of the world. But monastery gardeners saw something completely different. They recognized that this humble little plant had been valued for generations in traditional herbal practices. Rather than pulling it out and throwing it away, they intentionally allowed it to grow and even cultivated it in their gardens. Plantain became especially well known in traditional skin preparations. Families had passed down simple ways of using its leaves for generations, making it one of those dependable plants people liked having close at hand. Perhaps the most fascinating thing about plantain is how ordinary it looks. It doesn't produce bright flowers. It doesn't fill the air with a wonderful fragrance. It doesn't immediately catch your attention. Yet it quietly earned a place among some of the most respected plants in monastery gardens. Its story is a powerful reminder that we often overlook the most familiar things. Sometimes what appears to be an ordinary weed has a history stretching back hundreds of years. If you've ever accidentally brushed against stinging nettle, you probably remember it. Its tiny hairs can leave your skin with an uncomfortable stinging sensation for a short time, making most people avoid it whenever they see it growing. So why would monks deliberately plant something that stings? Because they looked beyond the discomfort. Once harvested carefully and prepared correctly, nettle became one of the most useful plants in the monastery garden. The sting disappeared during preparation, leaving behind nutritious leaves that could be added to soups, cooked like leafy greens, or brewed into herbal teas. For communities that relied heavily on their gardens, wasting a plant simply because it defended itself didn't make much sense. Monks learned how to harvest nettles carefully, often wearing simple protection for their hands. To them, the brief inconvenience was worth the reward. Nettle also grew abundantly and returned year after year without much effort. It was reliable, productive, and capable of providing food when other crops were less plentiful. Today, many people still enjoy nettle soup, herbal teas, and other traditional recipes that have been passed down through generations. Its story challenges one of our biggest assumptions, that something unpleasant on the outside has little value. The monks knew better. They understood that nature sometimes hides its greatest gifts behind small challenges. And few plants demonstrate that lesson better than the humble stinging nettle, a plant that most people avoid, but one that monastery gardeners learn to respect. The next plant is probably sitting in your kitchen right now. Garlic is so common today that it's easy to forget it has been valued for thousands of years. Long before grocery stores existed, monks made sure garlic had a permanent place in their gardens. It wasn't simply another ingredient for cooking, it was one of the most dependable plants they could grow. Monastery meals were often simple. Fresh vegetables, bread, soups, and herbs formed the heart of the daily menu. Garlic added rich flavor to these modest meals, turning ordinary ingredients into something far more satisfying. A single clove could transform an entire pot of soup, but garlic's reputation extended well beyond the kitchen. For generations, it was treasured in traditional herbal practices and became one of the best-known plants for supporting everyday health. Families across Europe passed down garlic recipes from one generation to the next, and monks carefully recorded many of these traditions in their handwritten herbal books. Another reason garlic became so popular was how practical it was. It stored well through the colder months, meaning monasteries could continue using it long after the growing season had ended. That reliability made it an essential crop for communities that depended on their gardens throughout the year. Even today, garlic remains one of the world's most widely used foods. Whether it's added to pasta, roasted vegetables, soups, or homemade bread, it continues to bring flavor to countless meals. Its story proves that sometimes the most ordinary plants become extraordinary simply because generation after generation refuses to live without them. Today, many people think of parsley as nothing more than a small garnish placed beside a meal. But in monastery gardens, parsley was far more important than a decoration. It was a hard-working herb that found its way into everyday cooking almost daily. Fresh leaves were added to soups, stews, vegetables, and breads, giving simple meals a fresh, pleasant flavor. Because monasteries often relied on what they could grow themselves, herbs like parsley helped make basic foods more enjoyable. Parsley also carried a long tradition in herbal practices. It was appreciated not just as food, but as a useful garden plant that served several purposes. This combination of flavor and practicality made it one of the easiest choices for monastery gardeners. Another advantage was how easily parsley could be grown. It fit neatly into small garden spaces and produced fresh leaves throughout much of the growing season. Whenever monks needed a fresh herb for cooking, parsley was often only a few steps away. Its bright green color also brought life to the garden. Even among flowers and larger herbs, parsley added a fresh, healthy appearance that reflected the careful attention monks gave to every corner of their gardens. Today, parsley remains one of the world's favorite culinary herbs. While many people still see it as just a garnish, its long history tells a very different story. For centuries, parsley quietly earned its place through usefulness rather than attention. And that's exactly why monastery gardeners continued planting it year after year. The next plant might be one of the most cheerful flowers ever grown in a monastery garden. Borage is easy to recognize because of its brilliant blue, star-shaped flowers. Even among rows of green herbs, it immediately catches the eye, adding color and beauty wherever it grows. But monks didn't keep borage just because it looked attractive. For generations, it became known as a plant that was traditionally believed to lift the spirit and brighten the mood. Whether enjoyed in simple herbal drinks or admired while blooming in the garden, borage developed a reputation for bringing a sense of cheerfulness to everyday life. In a monastery, where daily routines were often quiet and disciplined, a colorful plant like borage offered more than beauty. It reminded people that gardens should nourish the heart as well as the body. Borage also welcomed bees and other helpful pollinators, making the entire garden healthier and more productive. The monks understood that every plant played a role, and borage became an important part of that balance. Today, gardeners still grow borage for many of the same reasons. Its striking blue flowers brighten vegetable gardens, attract pollinators, and create a lively display throughout the growing season. Its story reminds us that usefulness doesn't always come in the form of food or medicine. Sometimes a splash of color, a busy bee, and a flower that makes people smile can be just as valuable. Our final plant is one that many modern gardeners have never heard of. It's called burnet, and although it rarely receives the attention given to herbs like rosemary or mint, it quietly earned an important place in monastery gardens. Burnet has delicate green leaves with a light, fresh flavor that many people compare to cucumber. Monks often added it to salads, simple meals, and refreshing drinks, giving ordinary dishes a pleasant taste without overpowering them. Like many of the herbs we've explored today, burnet also carried a long tradition of everyday herbal use. It wasn't famous because it was rare or dramatic. It became respected because it was dependable, practical, and useful in many different ways. Perhaps that's why monastery gardeners continued planting it year after year, even though history eventually allowed it to fade into the background. Today, burnet is far less common than many of the other herbs on this list. In fact, countless people have never seen it growing at all. Yet centuries ago, it was considered valuable enough to deserve space in carefully planned monastery gardens. And perhaps that's the perfect way to end this journey. Some of the greatest treasures aren't the ones everyone remembers. They're the quiet plants that faithfully serve generations before slowly disappearing from everyday life. These monastery gardens were never filled with plants chosen at random. Every herb, flower, and leaf had a purpose. Together, they created living spaces that provided food, fragrance, beauty, and traditional herbal knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Even today, many of these same plants continue growing in gardens around the world, reminding us that sometimes the oldest wisdom is found not in books, but in the simple things growing quietly beneath our feet. As we've seen today, monastery gardens were about much more than growing food. They were carefully planned spaces where every plant had a purpose. Some added flavor to simple meals. Others filled the air with calming fragrances. Many became part of traditional herbal practices that were passed down through generations. Of course, it's important to remember that these plants were valued according to the knowledge and traditions of their time. They weren't viewed as miracle cures, but as trusted companions that supported everyday life in simple, practical ways. Perhaps the most fascinating lesson isn't about any single herb, It's that the monks understood something we often forget today, that a garden could nourish more than just the body. It could bring peace, beauty, routine, and a deeper connection with nature. Many of the plants we've explored are still growing in gardens around the world. Some have become everyday kitchen herbs, while others have nearly faded from memory. Yet each one carries a story that has survived for hundreds and sometimes thousands of years. So, which of these monastery plants surprised you the most? Was it the familiar garlic and parsley, or one of the hidden treasures like angelica or burnet? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed uncovering these forgotten stories from history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more fascinating journeys into the traditions, plants, and wisdom that have quietly shaped our world for centuries. Until next time, thank you for watching, and take care.